one of the beautiful things about revisiting psychology, it is so incredibly learned. Um, I personally think that not only was Jim our greatest psychologist, I think he was our greatest philosopher. Revisiting psychology is an impassioned plea for the revivification and the reanimation of ideas. That was his thing, was the
Yeah.
therapizing of ideas, caring for ideas, ideas that carried soul, ideas that carried heart.
Ben Sells, thanks so much for joining me once again on the podcast.
Nice to see you again, Brian.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. We're meeting today in celebration of the 50th anniversary of the publication of James Hillman's Revisioning Psychology. And I've reached out to a number of different people working in different areas, people who knew Jim personally or worked with him as a, teacher-student relationship or mentorship. And you've known him for a long time. You've been involved with his work for a long time. And I guess to begin, I would love to hear where you were at, what you were doing when you first encountered Hillman's work.
So it has been a long time. In 1977, I moved to Dallas to go to graduate school at Southern Methodist University. And I had gone there to study phenomenology and religious studies. And as fate would have it, Tom Moore was teaching there. And I quickly became uh, connected with him. He became my thesis advisor, and he was the one who really introduced me to Jim's work. And likely, Revisiting Psychology, I suspect, was probably, if not the first book that I read by Jim, certainly one of the first. Suicide in the Soul was probably also there at about the same time. And that changed. I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but it changed everything. It changed the course of my life, uh, and it continues to. I mean, every time. I mean, the book is just it's limitless. Every time you turn to it, you discover new insights and new beauty and new sophistication. It's really an exceptional work of art.
Yeah, yeah. I joke sometimes that it's one of those books where once I start highlighting or underlining, I don't stop, and next thing you know, the whole
The whole
book is
book is.
highlighted.
Yes.
Well, when you were in university, did you already have an idea of what your thesis was going to be and then changed it, or did that come out of, meeting Tom and being in his class?
Well, that's an interesting story because I was in the religious studies department because that's where Tom was teaching, and but my program was called philosophical psychology. That was their phrase for it. So as a result, Tom was there, and then the other people that I was working with were all phenomenologists and kind of philosophers of a more traditional bent. And the first thesis that I wrote was on Sophia.
Mhm.
And as a precocious student, my notion was that philosophia, philosophy, if philosophy was going to be true to its name, then it had to start with her. And it had to start with a loving relationship with her. And so I did this thesis on various images and mythical configurations of Sophia, and they absolutely hated it, except for Tom. Tom loved it. And they hated it so much that I had to go back and do a completely different thesis. And that thesis ended up being on the idea of image in the work of Jung and Hillman. So it was much more traditional and academic. But that was an important time for me because uh, my original intention had been to continue in academia. I had gotten a fellowship to do a PhD at Syracuse. Uh, but after that experience, and then also after the experience of seeing how they treated Tom, which I thought was poorly, uh, I decided to go a different way. But so there was a long period of time. I mean, I moved to Chicago, went to law school, practiced law. Um, but all this work was always there. It was always percolating in the back and always coming through, even in my legal work in various ways. Uh, and then for reasons that I don't know, it really came back strongly. Right in my late 50s, about is when I really re-immersed myself in it. And I think that it was interesting because I think that that time, that break, gave me time to kind of find more of my own voice within the work and the particular things that I was interested in. I mean, Jim was fond of talking about people being on trees and how, there are certain people you can understand and other people are on a different tree and they make no sense to you. And he talked to me once about, and I have had the similar experience. If I look back at writings and jottings and notes from 30, 40 years ago, the same ideas are already there.
Hmm.
And that's something that's really interesting to me about revisioning psychology. Um, you will find the germ of all his later works in revisioning psychology in one way or another. But for me, what I took from it was always the emphasis on beauty, and the relationship between beauty, love, and soul. That's been kind of my beat in this work, and especially, and this is culminated in my current work, which is on animism. And I wanted to tell you something interesting about that with regard to revisioning psychology. Uh, in revisioning, Jim specifically says he's not going to use the words anthropomorphism or animism. Uh, and because they were corrupted. I mean, animism has an ugly history
Hmm.
in anthropology. I mean, it's part of the whole colonizing mind and that whole white Eurocentric problem. But then by 1992, when it's reissued, he specifically says in that introduction or in the preface that that the work is a program in animism.
Hmm.
And then in his 80s, in a talk that I heard him give, he came right out and said, "Well, I'm an animist." So it was always there that, and even in revisioning, the very first thing he says that he wants this work to do is to revivify our relationship with the imaginal world, the greater world beyond the human. And that idea, of course, later became Anima Mundi.
Hmm.
So there's a continuity to his work that always comes back to this notion of beauty and and what and the enigma of what comes first. It's always beauty, love, and soul. They're always together. Uh, Sometimes we think that it takes beauty to evoke love, but then in other times you can think, well, it takes love to really see the beauty of an image, and an image is psyche, according to Jung and to Jung. So that mythic configuration of those three that's what I has really that was his gift to me in terms of what really resonated with my soul and has animated my work.
Hmm. Beauty, love, soul. Maybe none of them come first. Maybe they all just come together.
Well, that's what Ophelia says. I mean, they belong together. And whenever and this is another beautiful idea from Jim. There are many gods, but one might move in forward, but the rest are always there. None of them can ever exist in isolation. They always are implicating one another. And certainly the story of Aphrodite and Eros and Psyche, they need one another. They can't be fully what they are without the relationship that psychological trinity that that holds it all together.
Hmm. Yeah, and one character, one figure may come into the foreground more prominently at any given time, like in that story of Psyche and Eros, but the others are still in the background, uh, living, working away, affecting things. Yeah.
Right. And that is reflected, of course, both in our personal lives and in our cultural and social lives. You know, at different times of our lives, when we look back over our lives, you never really see it, or I don't think, or can feel it when it's happening. And this is, because Jim said that we're a complexity of images. That we're not isolated individuals. We are a collection of images, and so in our lives, sometimes one voice will step forward, like you were just saying, and maybe be a little bit louder, but the other ones are always there. And that leads to one of the ideas that I also have worked on, thanks to him, is that we have to have the imagination of other people to be who we are. This kind of purely American, I think, especially idea that Jim called it the private self, I call it the secret self. This notion that only I can know who I am, that I am my interior secret self and the voices I hear, and so that only my personal introspection and reflection can allow me to access that, and you cannot. I think that is catastrophic to the soul. And that another way of looking at it is that I need your imagination. It's my imaginal connection with you and with my what I call the ecology of imagination, all of the images in which I live. We inform with each other, we correspond with each other. And it's that soulful connection because and I believe this for a long time. I think you meet somebody for the first time. And I think within seconds or minutes, you know things about that person that they do not know about themselves. And that's because we have been taught the propaganda of this secret interior self. I mean, we flippantly say, I don't care what other people think. That's insanity
Hmm.
to not care what other people think. Uh, I depend on what you think and imagine about me. I cannot exist independently of that. And that's all based on the ideas that I derive from Jim's work.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, you mentioned that his writing about beauty was one of the things that really first grabbed you. I mean, he presents really four big ideas in revisioning psychology, and I wonder, like, which one of those like really jumped out at you and grabbed you from the get-go, and maybe which ones took you longer to appreciate or to comprehend. Yeah, what was, because it's a lot to take in the first go, right? And so
Yeah.
maybe there's like one or two things that really grab you and go, oh, wow, I've never heard anyone talk about this in this way. I know that's what it was like for me. And then something about the way he was kind of flipping, ideas that were generally unquestioned, these unquestioned truths about psychology, the way he would like flip things around and play with the words and twist things. I just felt there was, I mean, there's so much energy there. I feel every time I go back to it, excitement at the kind of the freshness of his takes, and something of the truth of it really resonates with me. So I'm curious for you, like encountering that book way back then when it was really groundbreaking. I mean, he was breaking new ground for his own body of work that was to follow. But at the outset, I can't imagine, if to me it'd be like hearing the Beatles for the first time in the 1960s, you know?
No, I had very much the same I still have the same experience. I mean, well, it's love, isn't it? I mean, um, there are many stories about his kind of barbed sharpness and all that, but I never experienced it. He was always enormously kind and generous with me. Um, but to answer your question, it was the first and fourth parts of that book that resonated. What and I should tell you that when I first came into this, I was very much a rationalist, very much a nominalist. I was born and bred in math and philosophy, and I mean that's what I had done and read and studied, and so this work completely upended me.
Oh yeah,
Um,
he has a direct attack on nominalism.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there was a period of time when the bottom really dropped out for me
Hmm.
intellectually, because that's what it had always been for me, was intellectual, not imaginative. And yet, at the same time, that's what had been educated in. That was not my experience of the world. My personal experience of the world always had been animistic and imaginative. And I think one of the great gifts that Jim gave to all of us, and I know he gave to me, is he provided powerful ideas and images that corresponded with how I actually experienced the world. I think one of the things that, again, I think, especially in America, I think one of the things that we really suffer from is that there is a dissonance between how we actually experience the world as animals and through anima, and the ideas we've been taught. So there's that, and that dissonance extends again back to the self and all that. But before I get too far afield, so the two things that hit me the most was the first part was personifying, this notion of the poetic basis of mind. That phrase in itself has was like emblazoned in my mind. And all of my work has been to articulate and extend this idea of the poetic basis of mind. And then the last part of the book, dehumanizing, where he takes dead aim at this whole egocentric and anthropocentric model that we live in the Western consciousness. Those two resonated almost instantly with me because they were so contrary to what I thought. I mean, they challenged my most deeply held ideas about how things were, and I loved that.
Hmm.
Really loved that. The middle two, psychologizing and pathologizing. The one that I've always had the most trouble with has been pathologizing. And I think maybe the older I get, the more I experience that. Maybe and I also think it has to do with temperament and the particular humors that make up any given person. Um, and also some his historical part. I mean, Jim kind of came out of, I mean, he was he worked with wounded people during the war, and then he was a psychoanalyst. In Zurich. I mean, pathology was always a big part of the Freudian Jungian tradition, um, and he was steeped in that. So I think he had more of an intuitive feel for that part of it than I do. Just like the other part of his work that I have a lot of hard time with is his alchemical writing. Um, just because my imagination doesn't work that way. I mean, I know I mean, I'll read it over and over and over, and I'll get glimmers of it, but I will never understand it the way he meant for it to be understood. But the personifying part, I mean, he chose to use the word personifying instead of animism. But
Yeah.
they mean in his mind, they mean the same thing. It's the experiencing. experiencing the cosmos as a personified psychic field. And then it goes together with the dehumanizing part because he draws a distinction between personifying and personification. The big difference is that when personifying means that we receive persons from the soul, from the imagination. And that is the key to the whole dehumanizing, that we are not projecting soul into the world. We live within the world of images. And so that those two always to me go together, the personifying, the dehumanizing, because and I'll give you an example. And this is kind of comes from the work I'm doing right now. The kind of the model of perception for modern people is that there's this chaotic mass of data and information out there that I take in through my senses. And then the brain, because we don't talk about the mind anymore, the brain takes all that information and creates representations and concepts that I then project back out into the world. It's this indirect notion of perception. Well, that move of suggesting that I am the one that is granting order to chaos. And to make it even worse, in Plato, they're gendered. The rational ordering is masculine, and the chaos is feminine, and is merely a receptacle that is essentially formless. I mean, we it was already there, the
Hmm.
problem. But that's the basis for anthropocentrism,
Hmm.
because it puts me as the creator. Whereas, Jim's work was so radical in saying, no, no, the soul is not in us. We are within soul. And so the things that we experience as ourselves are really it's the soul living through us. We are manifestations, and we're unique in the sense that um, all things are full of gods, that Jim is fond of saying. But each thing is a different configuration of the gods, and that includes you and me.
Hmm.
So we're individual, we're unique, but we're collective in our essence. We are not singular, and we're not isolated. So there's a correspondence between you and me.
Hmm.
And but yeah, the pathologizing and psychologizing, it makes sense to me. The constant pushing through to try to see through what likes to present itself as literal or real to the imaginal background. That always makes sense. But yeah, pathologizing, maybe as I get older, I'll learn more and more about it.
I can imagine that his idea of seeing through might have helped you in your work as a lawyer to not get hung up so much on the literal details of any given case or client, and to be seeing through to always, I don't know, have a larger, wider perspective, or to remain somewhat more neutral toward things. I don't know. Did it come into play into your work at all?
I think it came into play. I think the legal work and then my time practicing psychotherapy, where it really helped is um, I'll tell you a story. One time when I was practicing therapy, I was having dinner with Jim, and I told him how tired I got when I was working as a therapist. Um, and because I was working so hard to listen to every single thing that the person was saying, try listening with such intensity. And he says, "Well, you're listening too much." And it made so much sense to me when he said that. Um, because over the more you live within a mythical consciousness or imaginative consciousness, the more, Vico said that metaphors and words were many myths. So when you start to listen mythically, it's like listening musically. Um, you'll hear that note that's not right. You don't have to concentrate so much. If you'll allow yourself to listen imagistically, you'll hear it. It'll like you were saying earlier, something will step forward. And so that was a great learning moment for me. And that also helped me as an attorney because I listened I listened differently than other lawyers did. Um, I mean, my first book was called The Soul of the Law, and the whole point of that book is that when you become a lawyer, that's how we talk about it. We say we become lawyers, and so you're trained in this way of thinking. You're basically indoctrinated into a certain way of thinking, and a lot of my clients when I was a therapist were lawyers, and what I saw was a lot of the problems that they were having is that they were trying to apply the legal mind to everything. And the legal mind, even when you're practicing law, the legal mind is only about that much of any given problem that the client brings to you. It's that's the tool, but it's a tool that doesn't fit everything. And that's why, you were talking about how I can't remember if this was before we turned on the tape or not, but Jim's work has found so much expression in so many fields. Um, Part of that is because of the fecundity of his work. It is so rich. His knowledge was so vast and deep. But also, I think that's actually a reflection of what he was trying to tell us, is that the world is inherently differentiated. So it it takes both of us in order for the world to be articulated and animated. And that's why it takes artists and scientists and poets and car mechanics and teachers. I mean, we all have our place, our mode of service to the soul, because that's the other thing. Another beautiful thing that I think that Jim gave to all of us is that um, it really is about service. It's about taking care of the soul. It's care of the soul, and that is what our job is. I mean, I articulated it in my book, Return to Beauty, that we're aesthetic animals, that
Mhm.
we exist to appreciate beauty, to create beauty, and to be beautiful. But it's the same idea, uh, is that you and I depend upon one another to realize the soul that's speaking through us. And that's love. So by working and looking at the world that way, I mean, imagine what our world would be like if people approached life that way.
Yeah.
If they
Yeah.
put beauty first and love first and soul,
Yeah.
you know. Um,
I was just going to say, I was re-listening to one of the last recorded lectures that Hillman gave at Pacifica. It was like a weekend long program on art practice and philosophy of psychotherapy. And he comes right out there at the end of his life saying, like, the reason why I'm here and doing this, beyond any kind of personal reasons that he had about engaging with an audience and seeing what kind of ideas that sparked spontaneously and all that, he comes right out and says it. It's to repair the broken world. You know, this idea from the Jewish tradition, tikkun olam, I believe is the Hebrew phrase. Yeah. And so I'm wondering, like, from your perspective, I can hear some of that in what you're saying, that it takes all of us to like reflect the beauty of the world, in fulfilling our role as Homo aestheticus. And that really that feels like a truth to me. When I think about like what is our role as humans on this earth? Why so many millennia ago did we stand up in the savannah and develop these opposable thumbs that can make and grasp tools? And the only good reason I can think of, why we're here is to reflect the world to itself through the creation of art and objects and speech and poetry and music and dance, all these things that are so uniquely human. And so, how do you think that that contributes to repairing the broken world?
Well, think about how if you're walking on the beach and that shell or calls to you and pick it up. Um, and maybe you take it home and you put it on that shelf with all the other things that you've picked up. Well, that's an altar.
Mm-hmm.
And and the other thing that you want to do with that shell is you want to show it to someone. There, we want to share beauty with each other. I mean, just the other day, I was in another room, and Jill called out to me and said, you need to come look at this sunset. Now,
Yeah, my
see
wife and I
that,
are doing that all the time. Hey, you gotta
yeah,
come look at the deer out front, or yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and that's
So
love.
true. Mm,
That's
yeah.
love. And and so Jim was fond of saying that um, that Descartes was why we have litter, because you've got to kill the world first before you can treat it the way we treat it.
Mm,
You have to make everything out there dead, res extensa. Once you've done that and you combine that with this Christian idea from Genesis that we have dominion over all things in the world. I mean, those two ideas, those are the ones that have gotten us to where we are. And the kind of the Euro-American mind is saturated with those two ideas that we're at the top, we're number one, we're exceptional because we have a rational mind and we can speak. And everything else out there is dead and meaningless, except for what it has to do for me,
hmm
and except for how I can manipulate it and dominate it. So that Western mind, and this is what we continue to struggle with. It's still a colonizing mind.
hmm
We didn't leave that behind in the 19th century or the 20th. Look what's going on right now in our country. And you can see that. And so Jim's answer to that and my answer to that is that you can't overcome that with more ideas about duty and responsibility, and you overcome it with love. And many people have said this, we will never be able to overcome the ecological crisis and the racist crisis of supremacy um, until we revivify our love for the world. And beauty is what typically leads to love. And so I've spent decades talking about how important it is to not to explain the world, but to appreciate the world. And the one thing I really like about that word, the appreciation, is part of it means, to attend to something, to see its loveliness, to see its radiance. But it also means to be grateful to
hmm
it and for it. to appreciate it in that way. And so once you appreciate the world, you're not going to throw that piece of paper onto the ground. It 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 literally would be unthinkable
Hmm.
to do that if your relationship with the world is one that's based in a love for the world.
Yeah. And I like to point out that the word appreciation, we really understand it when it comes to our finances.
Yeah,
We invest in a stock or a Bitcoin, and when it appreciates, it raises in value. And so appreciation to me is also about valuing. And so,
yes,
like you said, if you value your home, the world, other people, you're going to treat them well. Like that love and appreciation is the prerequisite for care.
yeah, yes. I forget where it was, but someplace in Jim's work, he points out, speaking of pathology, uh, because our God is now, of course, economic in our culture, but he talks about all the words that have been appropriated by economics. Like you were saying, appreciation, value, trust, bond, security. I mean, yeah, it's just it's there. Um, Except it's been literalized and monetized. And so, and one of the things I really loved about Jim, and there are many things that I loved about him, is he got more radical the older he got, and he got more politically and socially involved the older he got. I mean, his the note that amazing step in the 80s into Anima Mundi really ignited his political sensibilities. And one of another thing that I learned from him was to trust your outrage. You
Mhm.
don't have to have an answer in order to see that there's a problem. And so that he
Yeah, this idea of the empty protest.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, just allow yourself to be angry about something that's going on in the world. It doesn't mean that before you speak up, you have to have some kind of solution. No, just the outrage has a value or
There,
necessity.
um, the most recent No Kings protest. Here, I live in Riverside, which is just west of Chicago. And there were a number of different No Kings protests in some of the smaller communities around. And Jill and I and some friends went to one in a neighboring community. And it was one of the most inspiring things that I've ever experienced because there was so much outrage about what's happening, and yet it was joyous.
Hmm.
There was an instant camaraderie among the people that were there. There's absolutely no violence whatsoever, but it was a really good example of what I mean, just the sheer emotion of the outrage and knowing that you're a part of a community of outrage,
Hmm.
that you were standing alongside other people of like sentiments. I mean, it was a beautiful experience.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a good example of like what you said before about it, what was that old Captain and Tennille song? Love will bring us together, right? You remember that one?
Yeah. Unfortunately, thank you, Brian.
Now you won't be able to get it out of your head all day. But also, like our outrage can bring us together. But the
Yes.
outrage, if we dig into it, if we see through it in the Hillmanian way, we'll see that it's an outrage that its source is in a love for the world or a love for higher values like justice, equality, that kind of thing, right? Like it's not in and of itself just outrage for outrage's sake, but I think it stems from the love, and maybe that's still the thing that connects people who are protesting together.
Yeah, but I think there's something else there too, though, that I think, and this goes back to this notion about how we're educated. There's a dissonance between how we're educated and how things really are. Um, I think that we all know in our animal sense, in our animal faith, which is anima faith in my mind, um, that we are part of the cosmos, that we belong to the cosmos and with the cosmos. And yet it's been hammered into us that we're not, that we're individuals, that my goal in life is to be independent from you, to stand alone. Um, and I think and I think that notion of the solitary individual who is in competition with all other individuals, that's at the heart of the problem that we're seeing right now. It underlies the bigotry, it underlies the hatred, it underlies the false machismo that we're experiencing. Um, but we all have a part of that in us. And I think some of that outrage comes from there, that we realize at some deep level that we've been duped.
Hmm.
And when you see it in such garish and exaggerated form, you can't help but feel somehow tarred by it yourself. I mean, I know that's the case for me. I mean, we can't not live in the culture in which we live. I mean, we can't take off all these habitual ideas like they're just a suit of clothes. I mean, I spend all my working time in my writing. I constantly am seeing the mistakes that I'm railing against right there in my own words.
Hmm.
And that, you know, that's irritating. And I think is part of the outrage. And uh, but when you go to something like that protest that I was talking about, it does give you a sense that there's a way beyond it.
Hmm. Hmm. What do you think? I mean, you may know, but what caused that turn for Hillman from doing a kind of therapy on therapy or a therapy of ideas, really talking about psychotherapy and its limitations and some of these kind of wrong-headed ideas that were so ingrained in it, or so pervasive in it, to that turn toward the world and the soul of the world? Was it his encounter with Henri Corbin at Eranos, or was it something else, do you think?
Well, I mean, if we take him at his word, what he said about that was that he realized that in his therapy practice that the problems that were being brought to him were no longer personal problems.
Mm,
That he was seeing that the problems were in the greater part of the soul that lays beyond the world. And he would point to things like fluorescent lighting or
or the
uncompleted
traffic and
or traffic,
mhm,
and so I think it was just kind of I think that as the psychologists like to say, I think it was the presenting symptom.
mm,
The world presented itself. And I'll expand on that just a little bit on the work I'm doing right now on animism. In the late 90s and early 2000s, a uh, a group of younger anthropologists started talking about new animism and new materialism, and started shifting the focus back to matter and materiality as they talk about it. And there are various ways of thinking about why that happened. Among academics, they kind of think that it was a swing against the whole deconstruction movement, where the only thing you could talk about the world is to talk about it kind of idea. But I think differently. I think it was the world. I think it was the ensouled world was making it. Jim liked to say that one of the ways the soul gets our attention, gets our attention is through symptoms,
Mhm.
is through pathology. And it doesn't take much imagination to see the pathological state that the actual world is in, whether it's mass extinction or global warming or acidification of the oceans. I mean, we could spend the rest of the day making a list. But I think that what these young anthropologists were reacting to was the world itself speaking out. Matter was telling us that we needed to be more materialistic. You
Right.
know, if you
Matter
take
matters.
right, if you take the consumerism part out of it,
Mhm.
and matter matters, right? And matter is related to mother.
Yeah.
So there's this generative aspect to matter. Um, so materialism isn't necessarily, it's only a bad thing if we couch it in the wrong context. So I think that that's what they were reacting to.
Mhm.
And the new animists, to much to their credit, were also reacting very strongly against the colonizing background of that word, which was originally an insult. To be animistic was to be primitive, was to be undeveloped, uncivilized.
Yeah.
That's why Jim, I think, in revisioning, didn't want to use the word. But what I'm trying to do is to revivify it.
Mm.
I think what happened is it animism doesn't belong to anthropos. It belongs to psyche, belongs to anima. So in order to approach animism appropriately, in my view, you have to do it through soul.
Mm.
You're not going to get to it through the human. It has to be the more than human. It has to be the divine, which is how it presents itself. The very thing that the early anthropologists never understood is that these animistic people were not projecting spirit and soul into trees and rocks.
Mhm.
They were recognizing it there.
Right. It wasn't due to some kind of unconsciousness or that participation mystique, which is seen as a kind of earlier stage of development of consciousness. You know,
Right.
us now being at the pinnacle, right? And
We
that those
always are.
primitive people, yeah, those primitive people were largely unconscious of their projecting per personhood onto the world.
Well, the big mistake was they talked about it as being belief. That they believed in spirits. And so they had this cockamamie idea about the evolution of like religion that, animism was this primitive religion. And then over time it evolved, through the monotheism. And then of course the pinnacle being we finally leave religion behind and we get to get to science. Um, but it and Jim, this is another thing that Jim taught me in his work, is that belief is always a subjectivism. You'll notice that when people talk about belief, the first word is always I.
Hmm.
I believe. And if you look at the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, they both begin with I believe. So before you even get to belief, the first belief is belief in the I. And that's the problem we were just talking about a little bit ago. Uh, you have to deliteralize the I. And that was one of the big moves that Jim made in revisioning psychology. And then it bloomed even further with the idea of the anima mundi, that that we live within soul, not the other way around. And this,
Mhm.
one of the my favorite phrases from him is that we each person, and I would say each thing, each event, because to me they're the same. Um, we're a complexity of images. And what an incredibly liberating idea that is for someone, because we no longer have to keep it all together.
Mhm.
Don't have to unify everything under one voice. We can allow multiple voices and learn from the multiple voices that are speaking through us. And that's what I think he meant, because he talked first about revivifying our relationship with the ensouled world. The second part that he said in revisioning was to give us a new way of understanding ourselves and the multiplicity that we are. And that was those were two of the recurring themes in revisioning psychology that have reverberated through all his work. I think,
Hmm.
up to the very end. I mean, I watched that same week-long seminar that you did, and um, he was just as fiery and as brilliant. And we might have talked about this one time before. Right, like very close to the end of his life, he did a seminar on the Red Book with Sonu Shamdasani, and there were a couple other people there. But at some point, he said that the goal is to somehow live the meaningless life. And everybody laughed, and he laughed. But all of the things that you and I have been talking about, for this period, our conversation, has nothing to do with meaning. The sunset or the deer that our lovely wives call us to see isn't about meaning. Beauty has you insult beauty if you ask it what it means. You insult love if you ask it what it means.
Hmm.
Or soul or an image. If you ask an image what it means, you've lost the image. You no longer are in relationship and corresponding with the image. You've stopped it
Hmm.
because you're asking it for a definition, a meaning. And that was Jim's crusade, was to free the image from meaning.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think for me, and we may not be in disagreement about this, but it may just be my way of thinking about it. But what I've come to, there's been a lot of talk in recent years about the so-called meaning crisis of the West. And a lot of people out there trying to work on this problem of the meaning crisis and to help people think better and to perform what they call sense making and meaning making. I think that's interesting. It's always hyphen making. Like I'm the one who's making sense. I'm the one who's making meaning out of this event or this experience. And for me, the encounter with the sunset or with the deer or with the oak tree, the meaning comes with the experience. Like I think the giveaway here is when we talk about meaning, we talk about like a sense of meaning. And I think that's one of the soul's senses is that of meaning. And we can maybe try to articulate that through poetry or music to somehow communicate the meaning that was inherent to the experience. But as soon as we start making meaning out of it, what it tends to do is, yeah, be self-referential. This means that to me, and this gives me blank. There's always this kind of like self-serving equation involved with meaning making. Whereas if I'm just allow the meaning to come with the experience, it may be impossible to put into to words, or at least like rational, logical words as a kind of explanation, or that it is serving some purpose that I assign to it. But if I just take it as like, this feels meaningful to me and leave it at that and don't mess with it, I still feel like there's meaning there, but it's like not something that can be quite so, I don't know, verbally articulated or something. Like I was speaking years ago with this guy, John Vervaeke, who's what was he, a cognitive philosopher or something like that in Toronto. And he's one of the guys spearheading this meaning crisis movement. And, at the end of our conversation, I was asking him about like my yoga practice, where I'm breathing and moving with a certain quality of attention and feeling about it. And I said, that just feels meaningful to me, but I can never explain to you why it's meaningful. And he said, I have a similar experience when I do my Tai Chi practice. And even this guy who spent so many hours, articulating the meaning-making function and all of that, still had an experience where he could say that it was meaningful, but he couldn't say why or how. And there's something about that that I actually find like some kind of comfort in, that meaning is just given. And if we're open to it and we don't mess with it, it does enrich our lives. Does that make any, here I go, does that make any sense to you, what I just said? Or does
Yeah.
that feel somehow in
Yeah.
conflict with
No,
what
no,
you're
no.
thinking?
It sparked a memory, and I'm not going to get it right, but somewhere, uh, Jung said something to the effect of, um, the the more the image takes shape, the more the meaning is there. That the meaning is inherent somehow or integral to. I mean, the problem that we have here is that we're thinking of it in terms of problems, and which is what meaning does. Meaning needs problems. It relies on problems. Um, and it's like I guess you could say it just depends on what you mean by meaning. Uh,
Mm.
People, I think, try to conceptualize the idea of meaning. And what you were
Hmm.
just talking about is not conceptual. It's what it's what Merleau-Ponty called perceptual faith, uh, Santayana called animal faith. Uh, it's this it's this it's not indirect perception, it's direct perception. And so the deer appears and you have that moment. Um, I say I wouldn't call it meaning. I would call it beauty.
Mm.
Uh, I would try to, well, as I'm sure you do wonderfully with your yoga practice, you embody it. Um, and I mean, when you're talking about the attention to the breath, well, that's where aesthetics, the word comes from,
Yeah,
is
yeah. I always
aesthetic.
think about that when Jim's talking
Yeah,
about the aesthetic response being the
right.
sharp intake of breath, like when you
Yeah,
encounter, beauty in the world. Yeah.
yeah.
And that's where the yoga practice begins, was
Mhm.
that first intentional inhalation that moves the body actually.
And
Yeah.
that the feeling you have, the recognition you have, the kinship you feel with that deer is in the heart,
Yeah.
right? That's that's where it comes. That's where it
Yeah.
comes in. It doesn't come in here.
Through
It
the
comes
head.
in.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, in that pre-verbal space of experience. Yeah. And I guess, as we're speaking, I'm just going back to this idea that Hillman lays out in a number of his books and kind of fine tunes along the way as his kind of anti-definition of soul, where he speaks about certain qualities that he attributes to soul without, wanting to really define soul or get into metaphysics. But he says one of the things that soul does is it turns events into experiences. And that, I guess, is what I mean by meaning.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like this, there's something significant about here. And words fail. I want to say there's something meaningful about this experience, but it's an experience, not just an event that I'm perceiving and recording and analyzing, but it's something that is felt and embodied that moves me on some deep level.
Well, and you're a musician, so when I'm sure you experience this there as well. I
Oh,
mean, this
yeah.
it's I mean, in some ways, you could say it's the difference between poetry and prose. I mean,
Hmm.
um, but we have to be careful with those kind of comparisons because
Yeah.
then you're just setting up another dualism, right?
Yeah, totally. And then it's
And it
poetry
seeps
against
in.
prose.
Yeah. Um, but yet we know what we're talking about.
Hmm.
There is a kind of precision, a poetic precision to image work, or to music that is different qualitatively than detached abstraction. I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about lately a lot is that this, and it goes back to this whole perceptual problem. We think that we put order into the world, masculine order, Apollonic order, mathematical order. Um, and yet, when we talk, if you listen to scientists talk, they talk about findings.
Hmm.
They have scientific discoveries. I think what's happening is we've got it backwards. And I think this is what Jim is getting at with his idea of cosmos. The world already is ordered.
Hmm.
It's arranged. It's uh, the way a bouquet is arranged, or a concerto is put together, or a poem is put together. And so that's the reason. And see, this is why I so much want to avoid these dichotomies like of science and art. Science is poetry.
Yeah.
What science is finding is the order that's inherent in the
Mm.
world. So we've gotten it backwards for a long time. This kind of railing against mathematics. Mathematics is actually bringing us closer to the world because it's articulating in its own language
Right. Yeah.
how the world holds together. And that's why it works. That's why the technology works, is because it is of the world. It is of the cosmos. It's not applied to it. It's not derived from it. It's of it. It's with it. And so, yeah, I think this anytime, and Jim taught me this long, long time ago. Anytime you hear that either or,
Hmm.
that's when you got to start. You
Yeah.
start psychologizing. You
Yeah.
start seeing through.
Yeah. I
Uh,
think that's
because
great.
that's
The
the
way,
pathology. The either
yeah,
or is the pathology of the rational mind.
right. Yeah. And see what harm it inflicts, not just on oneself in your view of the world and your experience of the world, but also the harm that it ends up, you inflicting on the world because of this pathology. Yeah. But I love the way that you're speaking about mathematics and science and prose and all of that as being necessary in repairing the world, like listening to all those different ways of articulating the world. Just like, you started out by saying that we're all necessary and we help to create the world and ourselves together. That looking at any particular discipline as just another articulation, like we are all different articulations of life with the
Yeah.
capital L. Yeah.
One of the beautiful things about revisioning psychology, it is so incredibly learned. Um, I mean, I personally think that not only was Jim our greatest psychologist, I think he was our greatest philosopher.
Oh yeah,
And
me too.
and and,
Great.
and revisioning psychology is an impassioned plea for the revivification and the reanimation of ideas. I mean, that was his thing, was the
Yeah.
therapizing of ideas, caring for ideas, ideas that carried soul, ideas that carried heart. Um, the image of the heart he refers to, with regard to Michelangelo. And so I think that's the kind of ideas and knowledge that you're talking about when you have that experience, with the sunset or the deer or the oak or the yoga. Uh, so I mean, one of the things that I've always loved about this work is, and kind of going back to where we started our conversation, I had always been a creature of intellect personally. And that's just how I am. But the pre-Hillman ideas were hurtful to me. The way I thought about thinking was hurtful, was limiting, was restricting. And what he did was give me another way of thinking about thinking, another way of having ideas about ideas that brought them back to life and re returned them to me in a way that had feeling, had emotion, had love.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of his great gifts to both psychology and philosophy. See, he really was philosophia. He really did. It was about the love of wisdom and ideas for him. And
And
his
one part of that love, I mean, the expression of that love is a continual attending to. Like he never rests on any of his own ideas. He
no.
keeps working things over. It's like tilling the soil over and over and over again, and that is a dedication to wisdom. Never arriving at a truth is a love of wisdom.
And I always thought of him too, and this goes back to the heart, is his enormous intellectual courage. He was never afraid of an idea. He because he would take it where it led him.
Yeah, I mean, one of
He
his
never
first
forced it.
publications, Suicide in the Soul, like he's establishing himself as a public figure, a disciple of Jung, and he comes out with this book that's saying like, let's take suicide seriously and not be afraid of it, and go with the client into their suicidality. And
Right.
wow,
But to defend the symptom.
yeah,
That, this whole idea, and Tom Moore is also really excellent about this idea, that you approach the symptom with respect and care. You don't approach it to diagnose it. You don't approach it to cure it, to heal it, to get rid of it, because the symptom is trying to tell you something about what the soul needs or wants. And that's a radical idea that Jim gave to us, as most
yeah.
of the ideas were.
Well,
Yeah.
in a way, he was so against literalism, but in a way, what he asks us to do in revisioning and in his later work is to take the terminology of psychology literally. And so look at the etymology. Like, what are we saying when we say psychopathology? It's the suffering of the soul, if we translate it literally.
Right.
I mean, okay, that's a totally different position to take when encountering a symptom, the presenting symptom of therapy, is to hear it as a cry of the soul. Well, why would the soul be crying? Well, something's not right with the soul.
Right. And to go back to his aesthetic sense, the soul presents, the symptom appears, it steps forward. And he relied a lot on the work of Adolf Portman and this whole idea of self-presentation,
Mm.
that the appearance of things, the image as it appears, is the interiority. And again, you don't split them. You don't allow that in and out either or thing. That is that the soul is both interior and also and at the same time completely apparent in
Hmm.
the appearance of images. And so he was fond, and again in revision he talks about that the goal is the love of images. And when I read that, I hear the double meaning of it. It's not only our love of images, it's the image's love. And Plotinus talked about that the love emanates from the object toward the person, which turns our way of thinking about perception upside down because and this is animism again. It puts the agency back into the world. And by agency, I don't mean activity. I think that's where the problems that animism has had is that we tend to think of agency as movement, as an animation. Whereas, what Jim was getting at and Portman was getting at, and what I'm trying to articulate is that the animation is in the display. It's the very radiance, the very presentation of an image within this broader ecology. of imagination. That is that it's the beauty of the thing is the animation of the thing.
Mm.
It's ability to shine in that aphroditic meaning. So that's why rocks can be
Yeah, that
animated.
rock
See,
was coming to my mind. Yeah.
because they are they present what they are.
Hmm.
And it's in that presentation that their animation, their soul exists.
Mm.
So
And they're not isolated either. Like you're just reminding me of after some rains, some pretty heavy rains here, I'm on my morning run with my dog. And there's one spot along the trail where there's a big rock face that has ferns and mosses growing out of it. It's so magical and primordial. But after the heavy rain, the rocks are like glistening and there's dripping water. And so they're presenting in a totally different way because of their circumstance or the context in which I'm experiencing them. And so it's like the rock is saying something different or showing something different on any given day, any given minute. And it's not disconnected from its environment and everything else that's going on, which is really kind of beautiful.
yeah, one of the anthropologists that I came across in working on this book is a guy named Tim Ingold, who is an amazing writer and a very radical, very kind of in my mind, kind of a Hillman-esque kind of thinker. Um, and one of the things that the new animist and the new materialists and all have been arguing about has been ontology. And Ingold's take on this, and I think this goes to what you were just saying, is that it isn't about being, which so onto telling of being. It's not about being, it's about becoming. And so he has this idea that the cosmos is, in a sense of, as he puts it, continued birthing, is constantly being generated. And I think that comports very well with, Jim's idea of the soul as this spontaneous creativity. And, in the Greek myth, the original Eros, not the little cherub that we got later, but Eros was the generative power that brought everything out of chaos. So that this notion that uh, that the imagination is this restless, rebellious, generative, creative something. We don't know what it is.
Force, we could say.
Force, power.
Mhm.
Um, so the so yeah, I think that that's right. That the soul is and the ethnographic work of a lot of the anthropologists with these animistic people, if you just if you just listen to what the animist people are telling you, they're telling you this. They're
Mhm.
telling you that the world is constantly sending us messages. And I take those messages as images. The world, the soul is, you're talking about making, I mean, poesis, which means making, but it's imaginative making. The soul is constantly generating a new imaginative cosmos all the time. Um, and what a wonderful way, what a wonderful world to be in,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know? I mean, that's that sense of there can be silence. The root of myth means mute or silent, but that doesn't mean static. The It's just that we need to reimagine how we think of motion. Like you were saying, the rock appears to us solid and unchanging, but that's because of the limitation of our perspective.
Mhm.
The rain is constantly working on it, right? I mean, it's never the same rock,
Yeah.
instant to instant. It's always different. And that was, Jim's and Raphael Pedraza, you stick to the image. You got to come back to it because there's always more there. Um, it's always presenting itself in different ways. It's constantly being differentiated, which is what the soul does. And it won't stop in any one spot.
Hmm. Yeah, and like practically speaking, stick with the image. If you think about a dream image that comes and sticking with it rather than coming to some conclusion about what it symbolizes, right? Which then, Jim, I would say that kills the image,
Right.
kills it dead. It pins it to the wall like some specimen, and then you can be done with it. You don't have to worry about it anymore. You can move on to the next thing. But the sticking with it means allowing it to live with you. And when I do dream work with clients, I talk about, live with the figures and images from your dreams for a while. We're just going to explore them and see what comes to the forefront in this conversation, but allow it to live on past this conversation into the weeks ahead. And what happens in my experience is really remarkable. It could be weeks or months down the road, the image returns and makes itself known again. And it's like the image that I saw in my dream then didn't have the significance that it has in this moment now when it reappears to me and reasserts itself in my consciousness.
Right.
Where's it been all this time? Just in my memory banks, No. It's the only way I can express it is it lives in the imaginal. And that's the one thing that I do get from Henri Corbin is just that distinction of the mundus imaginalis, the imaginal world, from imagination as some mental process of making things up, is saying no, this is actually, and him getting it from the Sufis, that it's an in-between zone between like heaven and earth. It's this other realm, the imaginal realm. And I just like to point out to people, we use this word imagination. And again, I kind of like love to take it literally just to do a little trickster move on the language. But it's a nation, imagination, we could see it as a nation of images, as a nation populated by images, which are impressions and figures and all the rest of it.
See, I love what you said though, because um, I think it's an we say that the reason we can't remember our dreams is because they're not ours. The dream soul goes off and does things. Um, and so that's who the dream belongs to. But I love this idea about where do they go? Because they're not with us, but they come back.
Mm.
They come back to us. And so, I mean, I love the way the language you're using there. I think Jim would love it as well. Is you are doing exactly what he was trying to get us to do in revisioning psychology, which is to understand that in the realm of imagination, images are real. They're not figments. They're not make believe. They are psychic facts. And once you make that shift and realize that the what the imagination is giving to you is as real as a rock or an amplifier or whatever, um, uh, then you've made the shift into imagistic, imaginal, mythical, whatever word you want to use, a style of consciousness. And once you're in that place, you realize the autonomy of the image, which is what you're articulating.
Mm.
They come to us. I mean, I have, every writer and in fact, not even art. I mean, I think, a craftsperson, working on building a table, um, it's coming to them. It's coming in and through them, through their hands, into the wood, into the work. There's and again, what a beautiful world to live in.
Hmm.
Instead of thinking that somehow I have to populate it. What a crushing burden our normal way of thinking about things is, that I'm going to put order into the world, and that I am going to create my own sense of identity. Nothing could be more debilitating to the soul than those
Hmm.
kind of ideas. And Jim was wonderful at breaking them apart.
Yeah.
Mary Watkins has a lovely article calling "Breaking the Vessels,"
Yeah.
and that's what Jim constantly was doing, was breaking the
Hmm.
vessels.
Yeah. You would think that these ideas about being like top of the heap in terms of creatures on this planet, and thus, you know, having the responsibility of stewarding the world, the creating order, Adam's first job being to name all of the creatures in
Right.
the world, creating oneself, finding one's own truth, etc. You think that these would be great liberatory ideas, but if you look at how those ideas have affected people en masse, as Western culture spreads to all corners of the globe,
Yes.
all you have to do is look at the evidence. How are people doing with that, with these liberatory ideas? Are they
Well,
really liberated?
that,
Are they experiencing joy and freedom all the time?
no.
No. So maybe something's like bad about the ideas.
So my last book was called The Lonely Mind,
Hmm.
and that is the reigning symptom, the presenting symptom in Western culture is loneliness. And that exact idea is in revisionist psychology,
Hmm.
that it's that desire for unification, single meaning, identity. It takes various iterations. But as soon as you're caught in that privative, secret self world, you become lonely because you're cut off. It isn't, no man, no person is an island. Is that's all we are, is we're all islands because we have lost the soul, that in between place that you were talking about, that makes possible the connection, the correspondence between
Hmm.
us, the co-responding. Um, so yeah, I mean, we are reaping what we have sown.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I feel like this is a good place to end. I mean, there's just so much more we could kind of
On
go
that
on with.
happy note.
Yeah, well, I don't know. But it's where we're at, though, right? It's
It is
not
where we're
shying
at.
away from just kind of diagnosing our culture at large. And, you know, it's why I'm talking about this book again and again, is because I feel like it holds the seeds to some sort of antidote for the modern malaise, which
Yeah,
is the sense of profound isolation, in not just from one another due to social media and working at home through Zoom and all this, but isolation from the cosmos, from the
we're
world
estranged.
around.
We're estranged from ourselves.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we're a stranger in a strange land,
Yeah.
you know. And I really do think that revisioning psychology puts forth, articulates a kind of a Western tantra, and that the deconstruction process that Hillman's ideas initiate in oneself. Like you talked about it before, how you kind of the bottom fell out, or you kind of lost your foundation that your life or sense of self had been built on. That can be pretty scary.
Yes.
I think for someone whose only sense of self is that self-made, isolated, self-contained interior. But what then can open up is what we've been talking about.
Right.
This what your focus of your next book is on, this aesthetic animism, which is so natural and given to our creatureliness.
Yes. Yeah. I
And
mean,
that's the
the
true freedom, right?
yes.
Not the individualism and all of that.
Well, and Mary Watkins is also really excellent on that point too.
Yeah.
The liberation of this way of looking. But you said something there that really struck me that if if we are still here in 100 years, that book is going to still be here.
Hmm. Well, we'll see. And 100 years from now, it'd be 150 years, you know, and maybe someone will put a book out that says we've had 150 years of revisioning psychology and the world's gotten better.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for helping me keep the spirit of Hillman alive. Um, he, I was in a dream with him some years ago, and he gave me a blessing of a sort. He called me out in an audience at one of his lectures after I'd spoken up against something that someone else had said, some egghead, talking about theory or something, right? And I spoke up and I said, "That's not how it is." Blah, blah, blah. And Hillman goes, "You're in my style."
There is no greater blessing than that from
I
Jim.
know, and that's really stuck with me, just to be in that style. I think it's not something I strove for, but finding his work, I felt like such a kind of a kinship and a sense of spiritual ancestry,
Yes.
like the same things that troubled him were troubling me.
Yes.
And when I heard him articulate it and rail against it with such passion, I go, this is like a spiritual uncle to me, this Hillman, man.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
yeah, like I felt such energy and I feel so energized even when I reread the work. It's one of the few things in my life that hasn't kind of gone away in my constant kind of exploration of different
Right.
things. He's just like sticking around, and that's significant for me as a kind of, person who moves from one thing to the next a lot. And the things that stick, though, I know my soul really resonates with, or that my soul needs. And there's just a handful of things that really stuck around and endured.
Yes. No, I understand it perfectly
Yeah.
well.
Well, I
I
love
feel
talking with you and with people like you, like Mary. I just spoke to a couple weeks ago about Hillman and his effect on her work, Mary Watkins. And when I talk to you elders who have been with his work almost from the beginning, for like the 50 years, it heartens me that, I found ideas, a person, books that may be with me for the rest of my life. And as someone who is kind of post-Christian, I don't have like the gospel that I can just always have by my bedside that will always give me comfort and spark new insights and things like that. But I've got Hillman's books. And I think this revisioning psychology is a kind of, it's like biblical, it's like the book,
uh,
I don't know, or it's one of them, it's one of the fruits on my tree or,
yeah.
yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Ben. It's so
Thank
great
you,
to
Bob.
speak with you. And when your new work comes out, I have to have you back on because I was about to ask you, okay, let's talk about aesthetic animism, but I'm gonna leave it until you're done with the book and it's out and we can like really dig into it because it's such an intriguing idea, phrase, like aesthetic animal, which you introduced, I think, in Return to Beauty. That
Right.
one really stuck with me and with my wife too. We thought of creating like, if we're going to do a creative collaboration, we got to call it like aesthetic animals. Like it's such a cool name. It's such a cool combination of words. But anyway,
Well, thank you for talking to all of us and keeping this alive. It means a lot to me that that you're reaching out to people like Mary and Ed Casey and folks like that who because they were certainly there at the very beginning with formulating all this, but I appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. I appreciate your appreciation. It means a lot to me. All right. We'll talk to you down the road.
Take care, my friend.
Take care. Bye bye.